On paper, the evening looked ordinary. A charity gala in Shanghai early December, with a tidy program and a carefully curated guest list. The focus was meant to be on donations, speeches, and polite applause. For the organizers, it was another event to execute. For the celebrities, another obligation to attend before moving on to the next schedule. Nothing suggested that this night would linger in anyone's memory. Backstage, staff went about their routines with quiet efficiency. Technicians adjusted microphones, volunteers checked seating arrangements, and the MC rehearsed lines that had already been approved 3 times. Somewhere in the middle of this controlled chaos, the names Yu Long and Yang Mei Mei appeared on the running order like any other. A brief appearance, a short address, a photo, perhaps a song. No press release teased a special announcement. No insider hinted at breaking news. If anything, people expected restraint. After months of speculation surrounding their family, most assumed the couple would keep things as neutral and polished as possible. They would appear, smile, say all the right things, and then leave the stage unchanged, just as the night itself was meant to be. The first sign that something was different came when the spotlight rose and only one figure did not appear alone. Instead of the classic solo entrance, Yu Long stepped out with a small child resting against his shoulder. She wore a simple cream dress, the kind you might see at a quiet family gathering rather than under blazing stage lights. Her little hands clung naturally to his collar, as if she had done this 100 times in private but never once in public. For a brief moment, the audience hesitated, trying to adjust. Screens zoomed in, capturing the softness of her expression, the way she blinked at the brightness, more curious than frightened. There was nothing theatrical about her presence. No choreographed walk, no dramatic music. Just a father holding his daughter because that is what fathers do. A few seconds later, Yang Mei Mei emerged, walking towards them. The tableau was almost disarming. Not a couple performing for cameras, but a family simply standing together in a place usually reserved for polished performances. The stage, designed for glamour and spectacle, suddenly felt smaller, quieter, almost intimate. What should have been a routine appearance now carried a weight that no one could yet name, but everyone could feel. When Mei Mei raised the microphone, her first words were familiar. She thanked the organizers, spoke of the charity's mission, and acknowledged the children and families who would benefit from the evening. Her tone was warm, respectful, and entirely appropriate. It sounded like the sort of speech she had likely given many times before, shaped by experience and public expectation. Yet beneath the carefully chosen phrases, something felt unsteady. There were longer pauses than usual, small hesitations before certain sentences, and a visible effort to hold her composure. The audience may not have known the exact script, but they could sense when someone was drifting away from it. Then came the moment when her hand moved gently, almost unconsciously, towards her stomach. It was a small gesture, but in a room filled with cameras and curious eyes, nothing remained small. Attention began to build, quiet but noticeable. Viewers instinctively leaned forward, not because they knew what was coming, but because they sensed that what she truly wanted to say was not written on any teleprompter. In that fragile space between expectation and truth, her voice began to shift. It lost its polished edge and gained something else instead. The tremor of a person about to cross a line that separates performance from confession. Courage rarely looks the way films teach us to imagine it. There was no triumphant soundtrack, no bold declaration delivered with perfect posture and clear, unwavering tone. Instead, Mei Mei's courage arrived disguised as shaking hands, a voice that kept breaking, and tears that she could not stop, no matter how hard she tried. As the silence grew heavier around her, she attempted to continue, her breath catching on every other word. The hall watched the battle take place in real time. The public figure trying to stay composed, and the human being desperate to tell the truth. When she finally whispered, "I need to tell you something," it was less an announcement and more a plea for understanding. Beside her, Yu Long shifted their daughter slightly and reached out, his hand covering hers in a quiet promise of support. That single movement said more than any rehearsed line could have. It told the room, "She is not standing here alone." And then came the sentence that released everything she had been holding in. "I'm pregnant." The words were soft, yet they seemed to echo off every surface in the hall. Tears spilled freely now, not as a sign of weakness, but as evidence that she had chosen honesty over comfort. In that moment, courage did not roar. It trembled and still refused to be silent. In a world where lives are often planned down to the minute, an unplanned pregnancy can easily be framed as a disruption, an obstacle, something that appears in red ink on a carefully managed calendar. Mei Mei refused that narrative from the very beginning. Once the initial shock of her confession settled, she went further, choosing her words with painful precision. She admitted that this new life had not been written into their schedules, not aligned with release dates, contract cycles, or promotional campaigns. Yet she drew a clear line. Unexpected did not mean unwanted. Unplanned did not mean unvalued. She spoke of the baby as a blessing, not a complication. As a gift, not an error in timing. Behind those words lay an invisible history. Late nights in hospital corridors, anxieties over medical results, the fragile recovery of their twins. She did not need to describe every detail for the audience to understand that another pregnancy carried not only emotional weight, but physical and psychological risk. The miracle then was not simply that life had begun again, but that she chose to embrace it fully in spite of the fear. By calling this child a blessing in front of the very people who might judge her most, she quietly redefined success. It was no longer measured purely in numbers, ratings, or sales, but in the willingness to welcome life even when it refuses to arrive on schedule. When Yu Long took the microphone, many might have expected anger, or at least a sharply worded criticism of the forces that had pressured them. Instead, he chose a different path. He acknowledged the reality of expectation. The advisors who speak in terms of reputation, the schedules that prioritize market timing, the silent assumption that personal life must always bend to professional strategy. But he did so without naming, shaming, or attacking. He did not turn the moment into a confrontation. Rather, he used it to draw a boundary around his family and quietly declare that some lines would not be crossed. The message was simple. They had listened, they had considered, and they had ultimately decided that no external interest could outrank the well-being of their child. This refusal to point fingers was powerful in its restraint. It shifted the focus away from conflict and back to choice. They were not victims of a faceless system, he suggested, but individuals who had the right, and the responsibility, to decide what mattered most in their lives. By framing their decision with calm, measured words, he left space for reflection rather than outrage. The audience was not invited to hate anyone on their behalf. Instead, they were invited to respect a couple who chose to protect their family, even when that choice came at a cost. The reaction that followed was unlike the usual roar that greets big announcements. There was applause, yes, but layered with something quieter, deeper. Some people stood up slowly, as though pulled to their feet by recognition rather than excitement. Others remained seated, hands pressed together, eyes damp, as if clapping too loudly might break the fragile honesty they had just witnessed. What made this moment resonate so strongly was not merely the revelation itself, but the emotions surrounding it. The fear, the vulnerability, the determination to protect a new life. These were experiences many in the hall already knew in their own private ways. The story unfolding on stage might have belonged to two celebrities, but the feelings behind it were profoundly universal. Later, as clips circulated online, comments appeared from people who had never heard of the gala, and in some cases barely followed their careers. Parents wrote about their own difficult choices. Others spoke of miscarriages, high-risk pregnancies, or the pressure to choose between stability and the possibility of a child. The event had touched a nerve that extended far beyond fandom. For a brief time, the hall was not just watching a famous couple. It was watching itself. Its fears, its compromises, its hopes. And in that reflection, many found an unexpected sense of comfort, as if someone had put words and tears to feelings they had never fully voiced.